Hey, welcome back to another video. Today we'll be looking at the honkaistarrail combat map, and the combat map is essential because we want to understand all the components of combat. To know the components means the things that are affected and things are dependent on, so that we can highlight different roles, namely a unit's role. What are they dependent on? What can they improve or bring out from other units? And what does it offer that one other unit may not be able to? Similarly, you develop team archetypes, where certain groupings of characteristics start to have synergies with each other and better benefit in such ways. And lastly, there are endgame buffs that affect your units, and knowing how these endgame buffs contribute to a particular role or category or grouping will help. And lastly, this map helps us analyze power creep and which units have the most potential to be power creep versus most resistance to power creep, seeing what roles this unit offers that will stand the test of time or that are unique to it in such a way that it will be difficult for it to be replaced in one way or another. So, with this, the first thing to understand is there are different damage forms in the game. The classics are the basic attack, the skill, and the ultimate. But additionally, there are damage over time, which can be inflicted by a unit, or as we'll see from the break, the status. There are also follow-ups that are attacks that happen outside of a unit's turn. And these follow-ups include counters. When the enemy attacks into your unit, it may perform a follow-up counter. And there are other conditional follow-ups that may depend on a certain condition to be met, whether it's an HP situation, a number of break situation, enemy hit situation. These all constitute different conditions that can generate a follow-up attack. So with the damage forms, these are ways that you can output damage. But how can you increase these multipliers? How can you make these damage instances bigger? And the multipliers are through your ally buffs, namely attack, crit rate and crit damage, and resistance penetration. These all increase the amounts or the multipliers that hit the enemy with. Similarly, this is for increasing your ally, but you can also decrease the enemies. This is the defense reduction and giving enemies a damage taken or vulnerability debuff. Now these are all different multipliers that can attribute to your different damage types. Now some damage types may or may not apply depending on the type that's used, namely DOTs do not depend on crit rate and crit damage, but these ally buffs are multipliers that can improve your different damage forms. So with the damage, you can have multipliers to make each instance hit harder. However, how often they hit, that's the next category, which is your frequency, how often you can apply those damage forms. Classically, your speed and action value advance contributes to your basics, and they affect your turns. Your energy contributes to your ultimate, and the more energy you have, the more energy generation, the more ultimates that you have a higher uptime, and the more you can apply the ultimate. Classically, basics and skills generate more energy that lead to more ultimates. But some units currently have different forms of getting energy, namely debuff frequency and attack frequency. These are all different ways that the ultimate can be achieved, and that form of energy contributes to the frequency of ultimates coming out. The other frequency is for enemy speed. The faster an enemy is, the more counters that can be generated, and similarly, the more DOTs damage it'll be taken, because DOTs are applied during the enemy's turn, aside from unique instances. But generally, enemy speed improves both counters and DOTs. And the last one is AoE and mob size. These can contribute to counters because there are more enemies that attack and more counters can be responded to with. But there is a link with your conditional follow-ups. The more enemies there are, the higher the likelihood that a condition has been triggered, and the higher likelihood a follow-up can be generated. So this is one link that the conditional follow-ups depend on. As they are conditional, the frequency will depend on how often that condition can be triggered. Lastly, there are enemy statuses that are key to take note of. The slow and frozen state decrease the enemy's ability to attack, and that is in the class of a debuff with the slow frozen, the DOT, and the enemy resistances. The other one is the broken state. When the enemy loses their toughness bar, there is a period of time in which they cannot act. The broken state, when it's broken, they not only lose position in the action order, but they also generate a DOT. If you're in the particular classes, some may generate a physical bleed, burn, shock, wind shear, and the slow and frozen one come from the imaginary and ice. And the last one is the quantum entanglement, which is in a different class, but it also happens when an enemy is broken. The recent new form of damage is this class of super break, which depends on having a high frequency of attacks, but it is also necessitated on the enemy being broken. When the enemy is broken, you want to have a high frequency of attack instances that deal damage, deal break damage when they're in the broken state. So it's advantageous to have them in the broken state as long as possible. Getting them into the broken state with high break efficiency, and remaining in that broken state with either slow or frozen. And similarly, you want to be able to dish out a high frequency of attacks during that time period. And it is not as dependent on particular ally buffs, but the super break category is dependent on a different class. Lastly, there are battle constraints. These prevent you from just running whatever units that you have. The first one being skill points. Skill points are created using basic attacks and consumed using skills. Skills generally have more accessibilities. They can do more damage or generate more effects as opposed to basic attacks, but they consume skill points. You cannot just skill every time, even though skills generate more energy. You have to throw in a couple basic attacks, and that is a constraint. And there are units that lean into the skill point category that help you accumulate or help you consume skill points in a balanced manner. However, this is one form of constraint that needs to be played around. The second one is your sustain. The enemies attack you, and if you are unable to deal with the enemies attacking you, being through death or crowd control, you will not be able to put out your damage forms. Your frequency will not be sufficient. Your multipliers will not be able to multiply. And the sustain methods are HP manipulation, namely healing abilities. Healing restores your HP when you take hits. And it's really useful for counters because during counters you lose HP and then you can later restore HP. The other one is shields. Shields protect your HP, and another source, namely the shield, takes the damage instead. These sustain methods are constraints that prevent you from just running full damaging units or full supportive units, because you have to consider what happens when the enemy attacks into you. There are possibilities in which the enemy never attacks into you. However, that is one case where the sustain methods are not essential. These battle constraints do need to be considered when you are running and building a team as well. And notably, with this whole chart, the reason why it's set up like this is different units contribute differently. Some do more energy. Some can adjust the skill points. Some have different balance of multipliers. Some have improved frequencies for all units, and they play into other different units or different buffs in different ways. For example, follow-ups are very good for frequency, but also action advance and speed is good for frequency, and energy is also good for frequency if you have a way to do that. Super break is very good if there's a buff like that. You can have speed to improve your super break, but you can also have ways to slow the enemy so that they remain in the broken state for a longer period of time. If the enemy's speed becomes incredibly large, you could address it by using counter units, and you can address it by using DOTs because they take more instances per turn. And your constraints have flexibility because if you have units to play around those constraints, give you more freedom in that realm, you will be able to focus your resources or your team into different categories. So this is the chart that I've put together. I hope everyone enjoys, and please comment what you think could be expounded on and which units you think are the archetypal of each different category.